Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Ooley, and this is episode 137 of the Forge of Freedom. Today, I've got a bit of a prelude for Monday Gun Day. I'm going to share an article with you from the 10th Amendment Center talking about the Second Amendment. And I say this is a prelude because I'm recording this Saturday, June 22nd, 2024, and yesterday, Friday, June 21st, the United States Supreme Court released their opinion. It was an 8-1 opinion in the Rahimi case, which was a case where Rahimi was challenging the constitutionality of 18 U.S.C. 922 G8, which prohibits possession of a firearm by people subject to a domestic violence restraining order. And in the Supreme Court's opinion, they upheld the constitutionality of that provision, at least as applied to Zaki Rahimi. And of course, I'm missing the boat on the breaking news crowd, but I'm going to record an episode tomorrow that I'll release on Monday for Monday Gun Day with my thoughts about the Rahimi case and what it means going forward. And I want to be clear, there's been a lot of discussion about what this means for the Second Amendment. This was not a victory by any stretch. Of course, Rahimi lost, and the court upheld the constitutionality based on fairly narrow grounds. But I'm going to get into what I mean by what this means for the Second Amendment and for the right to keep and bear arms. This could certainly have been far worse, but it was not a victory by any stretch. So I'll get into more detail about that for Monday Gun Day. So keep an eye out for that. But for today, like I said, I've got this article from the 10th Amendment Center, which if you don't read their work, if you don't follow them, you should definitely go check out their website, check out their content. It's excellent material, excellent content. They do a lot of historical and philosophical discussion over there. Have some great newsletter, great podcast, and I'm going to share one of those pieces of content with you today. And the article is called "Second Amendment: The Untold Truth Schools Don't Teach," and it's by Michael Bolden, who started the 10th Amendment Center. And so let's get into it. Governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. James Madison was a student of history, and this quote from Federalist 46 is no exception. He recognized, like so many others in the founding generation, that the individual natural right to self-defense is the greatest threat to tyranny. But to the founders, there were actually 4 main reasons or purposes for the Second Amendment. While a lot of gun rights supporters and organizations often get 1, 2, or 3 of them, few, if any, are aware of all 4. I covered all 4 in some detail in this Path to Liberty podcast episode from our archives. Find it at this link, or read on to get an overview of what was covered. Number 1. It guarantees the states a militia power of their own to balance the military power of the federal government. The founders didn't put any of these 4 in order of importance, but reading the ratification debates will quickly show how essential this one was to them. This was an outgrowth of their almost universal opposition to and disdain for large, permanent, standing armies. Here's how Madison put it. As the greatest danger to liberty is from large standing armies, it is best to prevent them by an effectual provision for a good militia. On the anti-federalist side, Federal Farmer summed up the same view. A militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves and render regular troops in a great measure unnecessary. As Patrick Henry put it, the great object is that every man be armed. In short, a heavily armed population helps prevent the greatest threat to liberty. Number 2, it helps promote the individual natural right of self-defense. The Second Amendment doesn't give anyone rights It reaffirms rights that are ours by the nature of our birth. James Wilson put it like this: the defense of one's self, justly called the primary law of nature, is not, nor can it be, abrogated by any regulation of municipal law. Of course, the gun grabbers want you to believe this natural right should be limited to weapons from the 18th century only. But as Rob Nadelson noted, the Second Amendment cannot be limited to muskets and flintlocks any more than the power of Congress to regulate interstate commerce can be limited to trade in sailing ships and horse-drawn wagons. The right to keep and bear arms must include the free use of modern technology appropriate for self-defense. Number 3, it was adopted to support the people defending against foreign invasion. And it's essential at this point to mention the Second Amendment's preamble, well-regulated militia. Gun grabbers want you to believe that regulated has to be used in a modern sense. When governments regulate something today, they're saying something can't be done without their permission, if at all. But in 18th century language and context, a well-regulated militia meant a well-trained militia. Patrick Henry considered an armed population essential to liberty and safety. The militia, sir, is our ultimate safety. We can have no security without it. And George Mason considered the entire body of the people to be part of the militia. I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people, except a few public officers. Nadelson summed it up like this: so all men of military age should be well trained in weapons so that America survives as a free country. Well, what weapons? Obviously, the muskets and single-shot rifles in use when the Second Amendment was adopted are no longer sufficient to do the job. Today, the Second Amendment protects a range of weapons appropriate for citizen militias resisting foreign invaders and tyrannical politicians. That's just how Tench Coxe put it as well. Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American. That brings us to number 4, defense against domestic tyrants. Madison, the author of the first draft of the Second Amendment, was heavily influenced by writers like Aristotle and Delome. The former noted that the disarmed are slaves of the armed, and the latter pointed out that the power of the people is not when they strike, but when they keep in awe. It is when they can overthrow everything that they never need to move. And Manlius, a Roman consul, included all in 4 words when he said to the people of Rome, ostendite bellum pessem habebitus. Look toward war, and you shall have peace. That's their way of saying a good offense is the best defense. To Madison and other founders, the widespread ownership of firearms, including those by the military, used by the military, helps preserve freedom, and usually without the need to use them. Putting it all together, Roger Sherman may have summed it up best. It is the privilege of every citizen, and one of his most essential rights, to bear arms and to resist every attack upon his liberty or property by whomsoever made. All right, well, that's the end of the article there by Michael Bolden. Again, it's called Second Amendment, the Untold Truth Schools Don't Teach. And of course, I'll link to it in the show notes so you can refer back to it. I'll also link to the podcast episode that he mentioned in the article, in the text of the article itself. But I thought this was a good article because it really parses out the 4 reasons that the founders thought that the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms was essential. And the other interesting thing here, too, is that the article talks about, or the title of the article says, The Untold Truth Schools Don't Teach. And it's interesting when people think schools, they probably think high school, maybe undergraduate, college. But what's interesting is my father, Mike, who you know from previous Monday Gunday episodes, we're both attorneys, and I took lots of constitutional law related classes in law school, and the Second Amendment came up almost never, except when I brought it up. And so this is the Second Amendment is, not only do they not tell the truth about it, they don't teach it at all in many law schools. And so this is, I thought that the title was interesting for that reason as well. And we teach my father and I, we teach a 5-hour class where I give a little civics lesson that lasts about 15 to 20 minutes about the Second Amendment and the Federalist, Anti-Federalist debates, at the time of the founding. And by the time that people are done listening to that segment of our 5-hour class, they know more about the Second Amendment than nearly any law school graduate, which is a scary thought. But like I said, this is a sort of a prelude. We're doing a double dose of firearms this week, a prelude to the Rahimi case, which I'll get into more detail in the Monday Gunday episode. So keep an eye out for that. And so that's where I'm going to leave it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this article by Michael Bolden. I'd also encourage you to go follow him on his Twitter page and the 10th Amendment Center Twitter page as well, or I should say X page. They have some great content over there as well. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of liberty. As always, you can find us on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and all the most popular podcast streaming platforms. And until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter @ForgeOfFreedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.